Nice to see you all. Yeah, my name's Nick. I've been working in decentralized governance for over 10 years. Classic organizational theory background. Well, I'm a physicist by background, but moved through academia through a bunch of different stuff. I ended up as an associate dean of teaching and learning at the London College of Fashion. I left that about 4 or 5 years ago now. I've been working crypto full time, building DAO infrastructure, and now focusing on applying decentralized governance to AI, amongst other things. So yeah, I've been asked to present a piece on the future of DAOs. Can you see my screen all right? That working?
It, the future of DAOs.
That's it. All right, so I'm going to rattle through this. I've decided to do a bit of a futurist look. Very briefly, I'm not going to get too technical, but what I'm essentially trying to do is take a look at where we're at now and extrapolate into the future. So I'm trying to create a reasoned prediction of what might happen. There's an infinite number of futures in front of us. I'm going to pick like four divergent ones for DAOs: the good, the bad, the ugly, and the transcendent. Before I do that, I want to just kind of summarize where I think we're at now. It's been kind of tough. I'm sure those of you still knocking around in the DAO space have had a pretty rough ride over the last couple of years. I think we are still reeling from our DAO hype cycle that we had in 2020. I think it did more harm than good. We sort of got big a bit too early. And with crypto, DAOs are dangerously close to being useful and important, which is, of course, bearish. And that's kind of where we're at. And largely, I'm a bit worried about the nature of the market at the moment. I think it can go a number of ways. I think we've got a very poor market structure because the token economies that are making it into the world are pretty broken. So you've probably all seen the Gartner hype cycle. I think in crypto we have compounded hype cycles. So we have the hypiest hype and the troughiest troughs of disillusionment. And DAOs are very much in the pits sentiment-wise. But what's interesting is basically everyone still is bearish on DAOs, apart from the people here, obviously. Kind of VCs don't like them. Investors don't like them. Token buyers don't like them. And yet they are becoming entrenched into very deep parts of the space. The work of Optimism and Arbitrum are showing us that basically protocols will all end up with DAOs. It's happening anyway. So I think we're going to have this reluctant acceptance of the inevitable. DAOs are actually the means of decentralization. You can't really do it without it. So they're not going away. So let's presume we end up on the good path. In that path, we end up on this kind of path to productivity. So we essentially just keep going. We realize that DAOs are a radical new form of organizational technology. People finally get their heads around this. People sort of realize that DAOs have been going, we've been organizing for millennia, and we've had DAOs for a very brief period of time. And all the organization we do in the meat space is still a mess. So it's really unsurprising that brand new organizational form is not optimal yet. But on this sort of path, the DAO people ship. We start getting actually realized outcomes. When people say, what DAO have you seen work? We've actually got answers for it. And ultimately on this path, we end up thousands of DAOs a day, which sounds crazy. But we've got 30,000 meme coins a day right now. So it's not that crazy. I think we're probably going to get a return of the ICO. The rumbles of sentiment are going to start seeing that. And this is the path that starts to realize a good future for crypto. We're realizing the impact of financial centralization at the moment. And DAOs are basically the tools to do ICOs, but better. This will result in better distribution of our token economies, and it will actually end up in a scenario where there's genuine community control. At the moment, we're ending up with kind of hyper centralization. I think ICOs are the way to wind this back. And these will have sort of jurisdictional nuance. And part of the tech stack that will need to evolve around this is decentralized identities, or ways in which we can shape different levels of financial access so they can be somewhat regulated. But I do think that the fully permissionless crowd sale will return because we can do it. It's just a matter of permissioning. And if this happens, then DAOs save the market structure. So we might end up with some good token economies, better distributions, realistic valuations, and genuine community control. And ultimately, real decentralization. None of that can happen if token economies are completely cornered by a small number of people. Right now, there's basically a massive crisis in DeFi because one guy's position is defaulting. And that's because of bad distribution on token economies. It wouldn't have happened if we'd had open crowd sales. The next step on the good path for DAOs, we move past one coin, one vote. So this needs to ultimately become a minority voting mechanism. As it currently stands, the broad spectrum of people in DAOs are disempowered by one token, one vote. It ends up in a kind of hyper financial centralization. And ultimately, we need to move past this and end up into what I'm calling the post-plutocracy era of DAOs. And where I see this happening is essentially we'll still have coin voting, I think. It's just that it sets the bearing of the direction of the project. But the real day-to-day practice is done by reputation-weighted voting. We end up in something like informed consensus, where the direction of decision making is shaped by people's participation and actual knowledge in certain domains. And in order to get to that, we need to crack a kind of degree of deliberative sense making. One of the things that I think will enable us to do this is AI is going to come in and untangle the mess. One of the things that we need to recognize is that most people have never governed anything. Most people are not in a position of being in a position of governance responsibility until they end up in some kind of centralized institution that they've worked their way up the kind of pyramid and end up with some responsibility. But principally, albeit we are in democracies, people are genuinely disempowered and have never been in a position of governing of any complexity. So people need assistance. And ultimately, where I think we're going is that every DAO will have some kind of AI model that helps everyone navigate the complexities of the relationship. This is actually the missing key for UX of DAOs. Communities will govern LLMs, which is basically what I'm working on now. And my theory is that decentralized AI will ultimately outperform centralized AI because of its ability to fine-tune around community nuance, community-curated data sets, and do so in a permissionless fashion or in a more censorship-resistant and local governance fashion. Centralized AI simply cannot do this. So that is a kind of good path. We end up on 1,000 DAOs a day. We all get the job done, and we keep moving on a path that's productive. Now for some bad stuff. The market is currently scared. Regulators, if they keep doubling down on regulation by enforcement, good teams and projects get criminalized. Extreme forms of liability get pushed onto DAOs. And all we're left with is outright scammers and grifters getting away with murder, which is basically where we're at now. The only people willing to take the risks of doing this stuff are outlaws. The market gets captured. So DAOs remain hated by centralized players. The deal flow gets protected. We never get open crowd sales. The centralization continues. Wealth concentration continues. And this is just compounding at the moment in the crypto space. Those who get into the early rounds of things compound wealth. And the markets are just absorbing retail funds. If this happens, then the cycles keep getting shorter. And there's an attitude that's prevailing at the moment, I think, that there's a lot of people looking at this as like, this is the last cycle and then I'm out. So we're leading to like massive short-termism and a lack of sort of future thinking. I always thought for a long time that we'd be guaranteed to be on the good outcome because simply it's going to happen. But actually, we've started to see a negative feedback loop. And what we're essentially doing, the market is just becoming worse in an ongoing fashion. And this kind of negative feedback loop is compounding, where people are kind of getting used to rugs being part of the game, and the world is just getting more and more alienated from crypto. So we kind of fade into a hyper degenerate irrelevancy, and it gets harder and harder and harder to defend this stuff publicly. And ultimately, we just fade into a irrelevancy purely just because we're prioritizing dumb stuff instead of good stuff. We're also seeing evidence of re-centralization. So people who even got DAOs are winding them back. Treasuries are being offloaded to centralized actors to govern them instead of putting them under centralized control. We end up in everything being permissioned. So we end up in this kind of balkanized gated internet where actually, instead of being an open permissionless space, we end up with this kind of balkanized, hyper-gated, one internet for one person, one internet for another scenario. Things like on-chain KYC get normalized, biometric scanning, centralization of L2s, hotspots of control, hyper-centralization all becomes a kind of norm. The other bad direction I'm seeing is re-intermediation. So everything will be legally wrapped. So the cost of everything, the cost of DAOs gets higher and higher. Bureaucracy starts to spiral into everything, legal fees for everything. And there's a sort of prevailing attitude that we should be sort of domiciling DAOs into particular jurisdictions. Everything basically ends up in America, whether you're American or not. And we just end up as DAOs essentially converging on a kind of soft iteration of the company structure. That's the bad. It could get worse. So we've got very overt moves towards regulatory capture at the moment. This is very obvious to see. And largely this is happening in AI. So I'm keeping a close eye on the kind of regulatory capture moves at the moment. People are using and manipulating risk perception of AI to force in laws that shouldn't be there. So basically, there is no tangible risk of AI. And for the first time ever, we're regulating technology on future outcomes that haven't really been proven in yet. So that's kind of where we're at with that. And I think that could bleed over to crypto. And we've also got our internal regulatory pressures where people who actually don't want decentralization in the industry, the kind of regulatory clarity that people are looking for, actually entrenches a kind of market structure which leads to more further centralization. And this just means we start to lose permissionlessness and the affordances of the technology are crushed. If this wins and this keeps going on, the oligopoly wins. And we end up in a kind of era of massive corporate surveillance that kind of becomes the norm. And AI APIs become a kind of new oracle of truth, and a handful of companies run the world. This, if it happens, we end up with becoming more and more marginalized, and the attitude that permissionless systems are essentially criminal becomes the norm, and the permissionless web kind of becomes the dark web. If permissionlessness is bad, then transparency is bad, and privacy technology is definitely worse. So the recent fallout from the Tornado Cash outcomes basically puts developer liability onto open source developers. This is also creeping in from the AI side. This is to stop people launching open source models so they can protect a centralized moat. And if that happens, we lose the kind of second crypto wars. And basically everything we're doing here needs to radically change and essentially or becomes highly toxic to be involved with. So yeah, I think if that happens, we'll start to see every DAO using any kind of centralized system get cancelled. There will be a day where every Discord DAO gets rogued. I'm convinced of it. and other things like that. So this is a dark path, and actually I think that builds the needs for why we need alternative systems. Without DAOs, without crypto, there's no free path to transaction, and there's no free path to organization. I'm convinced WorldCoin is a terrible dystopian idea. Dystopia is being blitzscaled as we speak. And actually, we need to sort of get our act together and sort of build systems that can do these things without biometrics. Okay, so I'm going to try and finish on some more optimistic thinking. I still believe this is the path that we could end up being on. We need that good path to happen. We need to start shipping stuff. We end up going beyond the productivity plateau, and we end up in a kind of true DAO takeoff moment. And if this happens, we end up with DAOs advancing beyond centralized organizational form on many fronts. So we prove out that DAOs are a true emerging technology, and actually we can prove that organization can be done using the affordances of DAOs in ways that genuinely advance beyond the current structure of organizational form. So in this case, DAOs become genuine source of income for hundreds of millions of people on the planet. I'm pretty sure that if we crack this, we'll see a massive renaissance in community activity. We're running a project called London Voice at the moment, where we're trying to take DAO technology down to really grassroots community levels. And what we're seeing is that communities genuinely just don't have the capabilities or tools to genuinely organize at the ground level. Most community groups sort of collapse under the tyranny of structurelessness or something similar. And I think if we can create the tool set for genuine grassroots coordination, then we get a renaissance in community action and all community organized like we've never seen before. So we see the kind of open source innovation wave that we've seen in crypto, but with grassroots community action. And the number of people number of people involved in community groups radically increases. And we prove out that DAOs are for joining forces, and community action starts to go viral. One of the things that I'm getting very interested in is exstitutional form, which is Primavera de Felipe's sort of take on what might happen with sort of DAOs. And this is where we get DAOs at institutional scale. So DAOs with material global influence over culture, policy, and society. So imagine massive online communities that are genuinely coherent and have a global influence. I think this is very possible. So if this happens, we start to see institutions get better by incorporating decentralized form. And this puts a selective pressure on decentralized organization. And we see radical new forms of transparent governance emerge. And actually, this really unlocks new societal capabilities, because we get to spend money effectively by decentralizing budgeting to the local level. The dream that I'm chasing is kind of global decentralized collective intelligences. So DAOs merging with AIs to aggregate knowledge across billions of people, blockchains becoming sites of planetary thinking, and internet scale digital democracies enhancing global problem solving. And I actually think these are the means by which we synthesize AI and how we can control AI rather than centralized companies. Okay, finally, futarchy and DAO democracy. Another sort of thing that I think will inevitably happen as prediction markets will go mainstream. We're starting to see bits of this. And effectively, these put bounties on knowledge formation by incentivizing oracle-based decision-making. And futarchy concepts start to integrate into civilization scale decisions. And with that, we get a radical new form of governance. The sort of final thing I want to sort of drop as a seed in your mind is thinking about DAOs at the meta level and how we can coordinate them through massive scale DAO synchronicity. So imagine thousands of DAOs going off and doing autonomous work in localized forms, but re-coordinating to produce massive scale activity. And I think we'll get something like massive swarm-like epic scale governance. and massive scale coordination. Thanks. That's basically where I'm at. All right. How do I get out of this?
Thank you, Nick. Very
Thank you.
powerful. Very, very powerful.
Any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, Nick, I put in the chat the Atlas Madrid, which is a group that it's like 4 or 5 groups that bring together all of the neighborhood associations, which are very like powerful in Spain. Like your apartment building can be an associación, your block can, your neighborhood can, and they all interact in these different ways. And so Atlas Madrid, they made an atlas, they made a map. It's interactive and it's updated regularly about all the various ways you can participate, the services they offer. And it's one of these grassroots collections of work that I think might be a really interesting place for the kind of experiments you're running in London.
Wonderful. Yeah, if you could send me the link to that. I'm just trying to Google it, not finding it. And I will share the presentation in the Telegram group.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Does anyone I know we're past time. Does anyone have a quick question they want to run past Nick? I have a lot, but better offline just because we're past time.
We don't have a huge amount of time. Cool.
I really appreciated the various, the fact that there are infinite possibilities for a future and that we have to choose which one we want and that we can take action toward that. And the people who are building those pathways, sharing information so that we know how to hop on the right road, right? Because that's the hardest part, of course, knowing where to go. Humberto, please.
Yes, I have a question regarding the London. So your approach is the whole city instead of neighborhoods?
We're actually the unit of analysis is essentially London, but we're doing it in very small units of adoption. So we're going to borough level or local, even more local level, distributing essentially tokens to people, abstracting away all the sort of token stuff, but onboarding people into these tools where they can share the issues that they care about. It's a dialogic space that they can curate with quadratic voting. And then we train LLMs with the output of the data. So London Voice is actually an AI representative that feeds on the kind of mind of the participants in this DAO. They don't know they're in a DAO yet. But yeah, essentially what we're doing is building a kind of one of these augmented collective intelligences of the people of London. But yeah, it's local, but aggregates at the meta level via the AI.
Yeah. I'm asking because I did 2 exercises on city level, and the first one was on the neighborhood level, and the second was at the city level. And what we found at the city level is that there are too many differences between people, interests, and perspectives of the city because they have different like socioeconomic needs and perspectives and so on. So they do not find common ground so easily because they live in different realities. So after that, my perspective has been neighborhoods again, as neighborhoods as the level of the unit of the city, and then from there aggregate to the city level.
That's exactly where our heads just got to.
The only problem with that is depending on what services are delivered. If the services are delivered via the city level, then some level of decision making at the city level, like you have to affect change at the city level because like services aren't delivered at the neighborhood level. Some services maybe, but not all services. And so really disambiguating what services are delivered at which level and what services you wish to be delivered at each level. Which is why like I believe city level change is the most powerful level of governance because they're the ones that directly affect the most number of people, services still delivered at a city level, which is why if you want to work at the regional or the national level, right, if you want to actually see tangible changes, working at city level is the most direct. But again, that depends on what kind of governance structure the city has, would be my only point back to that because I work at the neighborhood and the city level also. And depending on the size of the city, again, right, and the way elected officials are elected, if it's citywide or if it's region-wide to the city, it's going to change what the city can offer and what can actually get pushed through.
Yeah, so I agree that it's the city level where decisions are made, but the thing is that the opinions from people vary significantly from
Yes.
where they are stood up.
Yeah.
So, like, if you are not very conscious on the people that are participating to have fairness on there, then we can end up with a reality that is only being fair for a group of people and not for the whole city. So that's why I am focusing on neighborhoods getting into the DAO culture, so that they first start improving their neighborhood and managing their budget in a participatory way for their neighborhood. And once they know and live participation or participatory democracy in their neighborhood, it can scale to district, for example.
Yeah.
The district form
Yes.
the city, right?
Yeah, and Nick, I would be interested in knowing more about what your LLM, how it works, because blockchains or block clubs, excuse me, blockchains, block clubs and neighborhood community groups are nothing new. Like you said, we've been organizing for millennia. I mean, humans operate in community, and so what are you able to do? Like, what is that LLM producing that you can aggregate up and actually use at a larger scale?
Yeah, it's we're aiming for a kind of sense making system. So it allows it collects data from people about essentially the issues that they care about, their local contextual knowledge. And from that, we use natural language processing to elucidate kind of semantic tags. And then we give them votes. We aggregate these tags into a kind of collective vote, and it allows them to reify their preferences across the group. So it's a consensus forming system. So actually what we're trying to do is to create a means for them to kind of lobby as a group. So it's a kind of a way for them to discover the issues that they care about, and also move that into action by finding people who also care about similar issues and talking to them about those groups as well. And it's just allowing them to break down the dialogue and also sort of poll each other without a centralized polling system. So it's a way for them to aggregate the issues that they care about and work on them together, basically.
Okay. Well, I think this could be a session in and of itself.
Yeah, we're actually going to do a crypto version of this soon. So we would love like DAO people to come try it out. So we'll get that out to people soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. So remember again, find us in the Telegram group, stay in touch. I want to congratulate everyone here. This is our 8th session. Bravo, DAO Spring, DAO Springers. Thank you, Dr. Nick, for ending us on a very powerful note.
Thanks, everyone.
Really appreciate you being here.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.